The core is one of those muscle groups that everyone talks about and understands it's important, but why exactly is it important for cricket and how can we train our core to get the most out of our game? In this video today, we're going to be covering the 3 key categories of core exercises that you should be including in your training, and it's probably not what you think it is. So it's not going to be your normal sit-ups, and also if you're getting back pain when you're training your core, today I'm going to explain to you why that probably isn't actually working your core and it's doing you more harm than good. Core exercise category number 1 is something called anti-extension. And I'm going to use this piece of string, sellotape and scissors to hopefully explain it pretty clearly and help you understand what anti-extension is, why it's important, and how by training that way, that's going to help you get the most out of not only your core exercises, but then transfer into your cricket. So let me do some DIY and I'll come back to you in a minute. So now that I've got this piece of string weirdly attached to my chest, we're going to talk about what anti-extension is. So all we mean by anti-extension is we've obviously got our spine. In the spine, there's some natural extension around the lumbar spine. But a lot of people end up getting into this really overly extended position. I like to call it the Raheem Sterling running position, or if you think about Velma from Scooby-Doo, when she's running and she's in that position. So you've kind of got that chest forward, hips back, and big arch in your spine. Now, if I do that, I straight away feel a pinch in my lower back. When we get into that position, the issue is our core isn't really engaged. Now in cricket, and especially fast bowlers, what will happen is as you're releasing the ball, if you get into that position, it puts a lot of compression on the spine at the bottom on the opposite side to the bowling arm. This is literally, in the research, a risk factor for stress fractures. So overly extending through your spine is going to increase your chance of getting a stress fracture, which obviously we don't want. And also, in a lot of core exercises, people just naturally go straight into extending their spine because they're used to it and they don't understand how to engage their core. So this string is going to help you understand how to engage that core, and this is the best cue that I've ever given to my players, and it always helps them understand how to find the right position. So a very common core exercise that we look to do is something called a dead bug. I'm just going to do some extra DIY here because I've maybe made that a little bit long. So, in a dead bug, let's pop that sticky tape there instead. So a dead bug is a brilliant core exercise. We've got our shoulders over our hands over our shoulders, knees over our hips, shins horizontal, toes pulled to our shin. Now, we obviously want this to work our front side, and in a dead bug, what we do is we extend arms and legs at the same time. Now, I'm also going to tuck in my shirt, just so we have the maximum effect for the visual side of this that I want to show. What will often happen in a dead bug, and as people move their legs away and go overhead, is they'll extend through their spine. So that string between my ribs and my belly button is now a really long string. And I can now slide my hand under my lower back. If I then touch my core in this position, it's a little bit squidgy. It's not fully engaged. So actually, even though I'm doing a core exercise, I'm doing it really badly, and I'm not actually getting engagement through my core. A really good measure of whether you're doing a core exercise well is whether you're able to speak whilst you're doing it. The fact I can speak whilst doing that, I've got zero engagement in my core. To engage your core, you should be bracing and really squeezing, and you shouldn't be able to speak. That is a long string, and in that position, your back is arched, so your Raheem Sterling, ribs are up, so ribs are forward. Now, next up, to do this exercise properly, what we're going to do is we're going to try and make that string as short as possible. So I'm going to squeeze my lower back into the floor, I'm going to push my ribs down, and I'm also going to breathe in. Now that is now hopefully pretty rock solid because your core is actually engaged, and that string now has taken all the tension out, so it's a really short string. It's quite hard to speak whilst doing this. If I then extend in there and straight away, I've got a lot of engagement through that core. through, trying to keep that string nice and short. So the difference is long string, short string, long string, short string. Don't know if you can see that, so I'll do it from this angle. Long string, short string, short string, long string, nice and tight. Hopefully that as a visual cue makes sense. It should do. Hopefully I haven't ruined my nice top. And we're now going to cut to the next part where we're going to carry on talking about anti-extension. Point number 2 on our anti-extension is also why it's not technically your fault. And what I mean by that is, in the modern day society, we spend a lot of time at our desk. If we're at school, we're writing. If we're at a job, we're in this position, and we're normally sitting down. When we're sitting down, our hips are flexed. What that means is our hip flexors are very short. That means they aren't having to extend and they become very tight. Now, if we sit down for 5, 6, 7, 8 more hours in a day, what then happens when we stand up? And also in this position, because we don't have to, we don't engage our core, we lean forward and we kind of just sit like this, whereas when we don't have a perfect posture, or we're putting our weight back on a chair where we're not actually having to engage our core. What that then means is we're very tight on this front side. What then happens is when we stand up, and I'm just going to change the camera angle so you can see me, but when we stand up, we have a choice. 1 second, 1 second, and I'm just going to change camera angle. So when we stand up, if we're really tight through our front side, we've got 2 kind of choices, right? The first thing is we could just not extend our hip flexors, and we could kind of walk around like this all day. Now, what you see in the elderly is that's kind of what they do. They kind of get into this hunchback position and they have a walking stick and they put all the weight forward. If you're not 80, 90 years old, then you're not looking to do that. So we try and force ourselves to stand upright and walk around normally like this. Now, what that then means, as you can see, I've got straight back into that Raheem Sterling running position. My ribs are forward, my hips are back. What this is called is anterior pelvic tilt. Anterior pelvic tilt, what that means is very simply, so we've got our pelvis, which is our hip bones. So at the minute, if I have my pelvis level, my glutes are engaged, and normally my core is then engaged as well. In that hunchback, or that, extended position through my lower back, my pelvis tilts forward. Okay, so that is called anterior pelvic tilt. If I was to do posterior pelvic tilt, I'd somehow basically get into that position. So basically, in the modern day age, a lot of people spend the majority of their day in anterior pelvic tilt. What that then means is you go into core exercises and you're straight into that anterior pelvic tilt, and you just do exercises like I just showed you. You do core exercises and you think you're working your core, but instead, you're not really engaging your core. And normally, once you've done a few reps, your back starts hurting and you go, oh, this must be really good, it's burning. It's burning your back, it's not burning your core. Doesn't mean it's a good core exercise. And the difference, it isn't necessarily the choice of a core exercise, it's how you do a core exercise. So it's a very, very important differentiation. So understanding that, first of all, it's not your fault you're in anterior pelvic tilt. It is to a little bit, because you can then mobilize your hips and actually get your hips working how we want them to. But we spend a lot of our day sat down. It means that when we stand up, we're really tight. There's a lot of pressure and compression on this lower back, but we need to do something about that. And we need to mobilize the front side and strengthen our core and get really good at avoiding extension. So rather than having a long string, short string. And one more point with that, just to circle back and really, really make it clear. If you're getting back pain when you're doing core exercises, you're probably doing it wrong, okay? So you need to really understand what that anti-extension position looks like. So your hips are tucked forward, your lower back should be into the floor, and your ribs will be down, and you're really squeezing. If you can talk whilst doing a core exercise, you're probably not squeezing hard enough and doing it right. And if you're getting back pain, you're probably doing it wrong. So stop doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reps of sit-ups or whatever and thinking you're helping your core when really you're just getting pain through your back and probably doing yourself more harm than good. Whilst we're on the subject of anterior pelvic tilt, I'm also going to explain why your pelvis being tipped forward is also probably the reason why you think you've got really unflexible hamstrings. The most common thing, or one of the most common things I get asked is, what's the best stretch for your hamstrings? I have no flexibility in my hamstrings. Wrong. Your issue is that your pelvis is living in the wrong position. You're really tight through your front side, but you don't realize, and that means your hamstrings are working overtime. At the minute, this is representing my pelvis. This is my knees. Are my knees? Is my knees. This barbell's my knees. This muscle connecting my hips and my knees on my front side are my quads. This muscle connecting my hips and my knees on my back side is my hamstrings. Let's now tip my pelvis forward. What do we think is gonna happen? My pelvis is tipped forward. My quads don't really have to do anything, so my hip flexors are doing absolutely nothing. But my hamstrings, oh my God, they're very, very tight, okay? So your hamstrings, when your pelvis is tipped forward, your hamstrings have to stretch. What do you think if you walk around for an hour or you spend a few hours in anterior pelvic tilt and your hamstrings are on working kind of overtime, being constantly lengthened? What's then going to happen when you stop? These hamstrings are going to be hurting, they're going to be sore. That then gives you the feeling of thinking, oh, my hamstrings are really tight, my hamstrings are sore, I need to do more hamstring stretches. No, you need to work out how to get your pelvis more level, and that is by hip mobility on the front side, learning to actually use your core and anti-extension, so resisting that extended position, and using these glutes also to get into that position. So if you can spend more time not anterior pelvically tilted, that's not the right way of saying it, but you know what I mean. Spend less time in that position, your hamstrings aren't going to be being stretched all day long, which means they're going to feel a lot happier because they're doing what they should be doing, okay? The reason you think you've got unflexible hamstrings is because your hamstrings are doing more than they should be doing. And at the end of this video, I'm going to give you a few exercises for anti-extension. That's our anti-extension category done, ticked off. So we've covered that short string theory, we've talked about anterior pelvic tilt, we've talked about a load in there. It's probably the longest section in this video. What we're now going to go on to is we're going to go on to category number 2 and 3. And then at the end of the video, I'm then going to give you exercises for each of those categories that you can work on, progressions, regressions, and other useful tips. So keep watching and let's go on to category number 2. Core exercise category number 2 is anti-rotation. Now, what do we mean by anti-rotation? Pretty self-explanatory, hopefully, but we're resisting rotation. And where exactly are you resisting that rotation? So with anti-rotation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep our shoulders and hips square to each other. So often in not just movement, not just bowling, not just batting, but just in kind of general day-to-day life, people are a little bit lopsided. So their shoulders might be facing one side, their hips might drop another side. What that then causes is it causes imbalances. When we have imbalances, it means that certain muscles are going to have to overcompensate because other muscles aren't doing enough, and then that causes pain in other areas. One thing I really like to, or I think is always really clear when people have an injury or when they have pain, is to not attack the symptoms, but to attack the cause. So for example, if you've got pain in your your lower left back, normally it's because, let's say you're a fast bowler, in your right hand fast bowler, it's because you're constantly getting into this position and you're compressing on that left side. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have to work on loads of left lower back exercises, if that even exists. What we're going to have to work on is avoiding you getting into such a bad position. And then that's going to help you get into a better position, and magically that left lower back issue has disappeared without magically discovering a left lower back exercise and doing 1,000,000 reps on it. All right? So with an anti-rotation exercise, we're trying to get you nice and symmetrical and keep everything square. My favorite anti-rotation exercise is something called a Palloff. It can either be a Palloff hold, a Palloff press, pal-off rotation, we've got all sorts. But essentially, grab a band, attach it onto something, ideally something that isn't going to move. And then what we're going to do, what's going to be the best way to show this, let's do it here. So really, this should be a bit further forward, but for the purpose of this video, it will do the job. So I always like to make sure I'm using a line for this. So first of all, have your toes pointing directly forward. Often people have toes kind of spinning out to the side. If your toe spins out to one side, it's normally because the hip on that side is tight. So if my right hip's tight, you'll probably see me standing like that. So really be strict with yourself, be nice and square. Your knees should then be level, so your knees then aren't going to kind of rock side to side. And then your hips, really try and have them directly on that line, shoulders also on that line, so everything's going to be parallel. Then all you're going to do with a band, you're going to press it out in front of you, and in that position, it might look like I'm doing nothing. But on this side, my core is really engaged because it's resisting my shoulders going and my hips staying in there. So as soon as my shoulders go, all of that tension in there goes. So we're pulling it in there. You will get a little bit in this top hand, but really we're squeezing in there. Now, similar to what we spoke about on the anti-extension exercises, at the minute, I can talk. So I'm probably not engaging my core as much as I could. So then I'd step further away, bring it in there, and then I've really got to squeeze as I hold the band. Plenty of variations with pal-off exercises, which I'll show you at the end of the video. But essentially, anti-rotation, we're using our sides to keep the obliques, so on the side of our core, to keep our hips and shoulders nice and parallel so that we're not compensating and creating muscle and movement imbalances. One final thing with that I've just remembered that I should have added in is a body weight equivalent of an anti-rotation exercise would just be a side plank. So with a side plank, you're obviously on your side, you've got your elbow under your shoulder, and you're in there. Now, a good side plank, we've got engagement through that bottom side, and we've got our hips and shoulders. Imagine you've got a line going up, they're both pointing in the sky. What will often happen if you're weak is your shoulders will collapse, there's less engagement through there, and then you're not resisting that rotation. So you're really trying to resist that rotation, square, square, engage. Like I said, we'll go through more exercise variations at the end of the video, but I just wanted to add that in now, that there are obviously different variations to anti-rotation exercises than just the pal-off hold. It's not the only one you can do if you haven't got a band. Core exercise category number 3, and the final one is anti-lateral flexion. This is a massive one for fast bowlers, and a lot of anti-rotation exercises that we just did double up as anti-lateral flexion exercises. So what we mean by lateral flexion, so anti-rotation was the hips and shoulders not being square to each other. Now, going in a different plane of movement, we basically got, if our hips are like this, our shoulders would be leaned to one side. So you're stretching through this side, so overly stretching on one side is going to increase your chance of injury, such as side strains, but also you're then compressing down on this side, which, as we discussed in our not in our fast bowling video, in our anti-extension part, was fast bowlers get into this position, they then extend through their spine, compressing at the lower back, they then laterally flex, which means that they compress on one side, and this opposite side is then where they get a load of injuries. Resisting lateral flexion is going to be a pretty helpful thing to master. With something like a pal-off hold that we just discussed, there is an element of resisting lateral flexion in there, because you could kind of get into that position if you're really weak through there, but there's some better variations which we'll just cover now. The first variation on an anti-lateral flexion is a tongue twister. Oh, that's a lot heavier than I thought it would be. Let's go down a little bit, is a farmer's carry. So a farmer's carry is a super simple exercise because all you have to do is hold a weight. But with this, it's also an exercise where you can do it okay, you can do it really well, or you can do it pretty badly. So a bad example of, or showing you what lateral flexion would look like in this exercise, you're going to let the weight pull you down. That's then going to hurt this side and stretch that side. We're not resisting lateral flexion, so we want to make sure we engage through this side. That side's now engaged. You're also going to get a little bit of anterior engagement. Anterior means the front side. You're also, in a farmer's carry, getting quite a bit of forearm and grip work in as well. And then all you would do is you'd walk, try and walk in a straight line and stay nice and upright with those shoulders over those hips. I've actually already got quite a bit of engagement in there, which is really good. And you could turn around and walk back. You could also hold one each side, but for true anti kind of lateral flexion, I really like holding one side because then you're really having to resist it a little bit more. What you could also do, probably a little bit too light, but hey ho. What you could also do is do a farmer's carry, but do it overhead. So overhead, you're gonna have to resist that position, kind of leaning over. So once again, I've then got more engagement. Probably didn't choose heavy enough weight, but you could then do it in there. And actually I've got the engagement kind of in there now. But once again, you're trying to keep everything nice and strong, nice and overhead. The simple variation is once again really a side plank. So a side plank is a brilliant exercise because we're getting anti-rotation, we're also getting anti-extension really, and we are getting anti-lateral flexion. So anti-lateral flexion in this position would be not letting our hips drop. So we're trying to get our hips high, level, so from our shoulders down to our ankles, we're in a nice straight line, and we've got big engagement through those obliques on the side of our core. So that is core exercise category number 3. Probably should have come up with a easier to say catch line for that. So we've got number 1 was anti-extension, number 2 was anti-rotation, number 3 was anti-lateral flexion. Now let's go into some exercises to work on all of them with some progressions and regressions for you to take away. One final thing to add on the lateral flexion part, which I've just remembered, is one of my bugbears with cricket coaches is it's very easy to look at a young fast bowler, or old fast bowlers as well, but look at a fast bowler and they're in this position and they're laterally flexed. You're in that position because really you probably haven't got enough strength in these sides and you don't train enough to be able to resist that position. What majority of cricket coaches then do is they stick those poles in the ground so that when you run, and ultimately they want you to be nice and tall, 100% agree with that. The issue is they then stick poles in the ground to try and make you resist leaning over. Does work to a point, but really the reason you're leaning over is because you haven't got the strength to resist it. So just get side planking. A lot of children that I see when they first come in and train, they can't hold a side plank for very long. They're very, very weak down the sides. It doesn't take long. It's not a hard exercise, as in it's not a complicated exercise to do. Anyone can do it from anywhere. Get some strength down those sides, and that's going to help you a lot more than just kind of trying to avoid some cones, some poles that are stuck next to you. So, as promised, let's get into our progressions and regressions for each 3 of those categories and our core exercises that I recommend you doing. Not sure why I grabbed the bat, I don't need that. So, exercise number 1 that we're going to do is going to be a sit-up. I'm kidding, sit-ups suck. Sit-ups, all you do is you kind of flex through this upper back and you'll just end up getting back pain. Bin off your sit-ups and do these instead. So, exercise number 1 is, that's why I had the bat, is a dead bug. We've already covered the dead bug, but let's really work out how to make it really, really good. Hands over our shoulders, knees over our hips, shins horizontal, toes pulled to our shin. First variation on dead bug would literally be, so the most simple one would do is keeping your legs there, just do your arms one at a time. After that, next progression would be keep your arms still, just lower your legs one at a time. Then you can start bringing in doing the same arm, same leg, or you could go opposite arm, opposite leg, or you could go both arms, both legs in there. Now, a good dead bug, you won't see any movement. So if I'm going to move this side, you won't see any movement in my left knee, hopefully. So that should have been pretty still. Big core engagement.
A bad dead bug, you'll see something like this. Oh, I don't know why that leg's shaking. So it'll look something like that. So that leg is going to move. That's where we're bringing them back. So what I like to do with this is pop your toe of your bat into your foot and hold, well, you can either do it either way around, but then hold the top there. You're then going to push into your bat. What that's going to mean is it's going to lock in this left-hand side, and it's not going to allow you to move as you go through the dead bug. So that's a variation you can do at home. If you're struggling to get that engagement through your lower back in the gym, not engagement, if you're struggling to push that lower back down into the floor, then one thing I like to do, what's going to be the best angle for this, is put a band on something that's not going to move, get some tension on it, pull it out, and put it under your lower back. Now, what you're then going to do is you're going to do your reps, but not let that band move. So if I then extend my spine, that band is going to release. So it's a really good way of checking if you're doing the exercise well. Right, next up, let's look at our anti-rotation exercises. So we looked at pull-off hold, we looked at side planks. Because we're going to use a side plank for anti-lateral flexion, I'm going to do the variations for anti-rotation on our pull-off hold. So, exercise number 1, remember we want our hips and shoulders to be nice and square, and we press out and we just hold in that position. To make that harder, what you can do is you can press in and out. You could also do it with a split stance, which makes it a little bit harder. You could also press overhead. Now, with that exercise, you've then got an element of lateral flexion coming into it. So anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion exercises normally pair up pretty well. We kind of work on two things at once, which is really good. One other thing we can do is, so this is a really funky variation, which people always really enjoy. You have to be a little bit more advanced for it, but get a light weight and whack it on the band, and then pull the band out. And in this position, we're going to try and make the weight move as much as possible. So we're going to push and hold. Push and hold, push and hold, in there. And basically when I'm pushing out to that end point, because the weight is wiggling about, it's making it really hard at that end position to hold it. What you could also do, if you don't have a weight, you could do that with a partner. And let's say this is my partner. Hello, partner. You would then hold the band yourself and you'd wiggle it, and basically you'd try and get them to really resist it in there. So that is our pull-off variations, our progressions and regressions. Let's then just finish on our side plank progressions and regressions. So we've already gone through the normal side plank. Now, if that's too hard for you, all you're going to do, tuck your feet up to your bum and just go through your knees. So I call this a half side plank. A little bit easier, really nice. Same things apply. Keep your hips forward, hips up, shoulders and hips both pointing in the sky. If you feel your shoulders rotating and you're struggling with that, stick your hand up to the sky. Very simple. If this side plank is a little bit hard for you, wrong. If it's a little bit easy for you, what you're going to change is there's a few different things we could do. Number 1 is we could add in a knee raise, which makes it a bit tougher. We could also add in a reach overhead, and we could also do it as a bit of a row. So with a band, side plank in there, and then rowing on that top side, and you're then having to resist that lateral flexion and also that rotation. I've probably given you 15 different core exercises there that you could do. Wouldn't recommend doing them all at once, obviously, but once one gets a little bit easy, progress it on, expose your body to something new, and you'll keep progressing. That wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed that. I imagine once I've edited all of that, it's going to be a fairly lengthy video, but it's lengthy for a reason. The core is really, really important, and there's a lot of elements that go in to not only making it strong, but making it strong in a way that's going to help you with your cricket. If you just wanted a six-pack, all you would probably do is anti-extension exercises and you could get away with it. But in cricket, it's very rotational and we really need to be able to resist that lateral flexion. So it's very important we get really strong on the sides as well. Giving you lots of exercises, lots of progressions, lots of regressions. We've talked about all sorts of things. We've also got into other topics such as anterior pelvic tilt, your back pain, your hamstring flexibility, and why that isn't probably the issue that you think it is. So we've covered a lot of points in there. If there's anything you think I've missed, let me know. Drop it in the comments below. And yes, please do like and subscribe. It really helps the channel to be able to grow and ultimately for us to help more cricketers just like yourself. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. And I will be back in a couple of weeks with a video focused on your throwing, and focusing on your throwing, your shoulder pain, your elbow pain you might be getting whilst throwing. So if you subscribe to the channel, you'll be the first to get access to that video, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.